Hello everyone, my name is Malcolm Innes and I'm chairing this Expo North session called Marshalling Resources, Why the Academic, Business and Creative Sectors Need to Work Together More. We have a wonderful panel today joining us and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves.
Hi folks, my name's Chris Speed. I'm a professor of design informatics at Edinburgh. It sounds pompous, doesn't it? Actually, I did fine art at Brighton in the 90s and I find myself leading a couple of things. One, a large creative clusters program called Creative Informatics, which is trying to extend data literacies across the creative industries in a very horizontal sense, but also now leading the Futures Institute, of which I think will house a whole bunch of interdisciplinary spaces, projects, knowledge, relationship, partnerships, including the creative industries. So nice to meet you all.
Hi, I'm Fiona Bennett, and I'm a theatre practitioner, a poet and a podcaster, and I'm one of the co-directors of the MAP Consortium. And the MAP has been going for around 20 years, and we're a company of artists across all disciplines, working with the tools and skills of arts practice to enable change and development with businesses, organisations in the public sector and the cultural sector, and also in placemaking work, working mostly with leadership development and organisational development and culture.
And me, Giovanni Schiuma. Hello to everyone. I'm based in Italy. I've been all my life basically working in academia, but always looking for the relationship with the business. My passion has been always on focusing how to manage knowledge to improve the value creation mechanism of the organizations. And in my journey in the last decade, I've been exploring what are the benefits of creating what I call the creative partnership, the relationship between the arts, the business, and then the academia. So hopefully today we will be able to share some of our own experience.
Thank you very much to the panel. And as I said, my name is Malcolm Innes. I'm Director for the Centre of Island Creativity at Shetland UHI. I'm also Chair of the Creative Economy Knowledge Exchange Sector Group in UHI. My industry experience is probably about 25 years working in design practice before falling into academia slowly and then eventually fully. Like many on the panel, have experience on both sides of this so-called divide, but perhaps it's not as wide a chasm as we sometimes think. So I'm going to start. The first question for the panel is actually fairly basic. Why should a business work at all with academics? So I'm going to start with Chris on that one.
Sure. Well, I'm on the other side of the fence. I'm thinking, why should a business work with me, with my colleagues? And I think academia has come an awfully long way in the last 20, 30 years. We used to talk about modes. Mode one was always that academia would look on the world. We would stay high up in the ivory tower and we would look upon it through some privileged glasses and try to make understandings, watch and learn by looking. It was a very distant relationship. Mode two tried to talk about this idea that, well, hang on, people in the world know an awful lot about the world, so maybe we need to come down from the tower and periodically touch base, co-create challenges. And now the last one, which I think we're all really thoroughly invested in, is let's get academia out into the world and let's assume that the ivory tower is no longer a place of privilege. So to some extent, if I don't break down from my colleagues' sense of how to get in the world, how to work with industry, then we lose this terrific moment where we co-create and understand what it's like to be in the world. So from my perspective, we've got to get out. We've got to change the assumption that the ivory tower or the universities is a threshold which is hard to cross. So breaking down that threshold is critical to understand what it's like, the challenges out there in the real world.
And Fiona, why do you think it's important for business and the industry to actually work with universities and individual academics?
I think answering kind of both as a business of artists, but also as artists working with business and sometimes with academia in play, I think my observation would be, which is very apparent to all of us at the moment and has been over the last 10 years particularly, is that for business, more and more, the questions are really challenging for all of us. They're not going to be solved by traditional methods of thinking and planning and actioning. So I think being in co-creation, as Chris was saying, and in collaboration around what we're all facing and dealing with, and being with people who can shift our thinking, it's helpful to all the angles. So I think there's perhaps more, there may be, there's a kind of higher resonance around thinking and thought and process around that, I think, than there ever has been. And obviously universities are the source point for that. And it's a rich time to be working together, I think.
Thank you. Giovanni, I'm interested, Chris talked about the ivory tower of academia. Is that a terminology that actually exists outside the UK?
Well, I mean, the academia has been always traditionally autoreferential because academics are assessed against their publication. And usually publication tends to explore and to put forward the cutting edge, the knowledge, the frontier of the knowledge. So somehow the academics have been always more interested in doing speculative research, particularly the academic-based research, basic research, which is what we do in academia. But there's been a trend in the last decades to reinforce the relationship between academia and business. And the benefits go in both ways. For academia, it is urgent to become more relevant, and to justify the existence. But looking from the perspective of business, which is the key focus of this question, business has multiple benefits in engaging in a relationship with academia. The traditional one is to get the graduates, but more recently, because the competitive environment has been evolving rapidly, business, and we talk about open innovation, we talk about the new challenges. So business needs to get access, not necessarily to knowledge, because sometimes business can have in some specific realms more advanced knowledge than academia. But it's more about having access to fresh thinking. It's more about having access to talents, to intercept the talents before they get out. And it is more about cultivating what I would call a knowledge dialogue that will enrich the capacity of the organization to learn. So the reason why business should get engaged with the academia is not necessarily because they want to answer to a specific question, which can be the case when you have a research project focusing on a specific question, but it's more about engaging the organization in a learning process, which is going to transform the organization itself, exposing the organization to different way of looking to the reality, the different way of critical thinking. So is more engaging in a transformation, in a learning transformation. And this, I believe, is the key benefits that business can get from engaging in a relationship with the academia. Then, if we want to go more in detail, then there are different ways, different techniques, but also depend from the nature of the business, if we are talking about the big, small, micro organization. But in any case, it is beneficial to create what I call knowledge osmosis. So the ability to transfer knowledge in both ways, because that enrich both business and academia.
I think that's a really important thing that you just kind of slipped in there, is actually that quite often there is knowledge within the business that is really important to the process as well. It's not just a one-way process. As you said, it's osmosis, it works both ways. And it kind of reminded me when I first started in academia, that this in academia was quite often referred to as knowledge transfer. So the implication that the knowledge existed in the university and the university was giving it to business. Whereas now the common terminology in universities is knowledge exchange. And that's a very transactional thing. And that suggests that there is, as you suggested, things going both directions. And to make it work, it needs knowledge from business applied with knowledge from the individuals in the university as well to make it work. So that's great. I mean, so let's say that we have a business, or I am a small business, and I've heard this and I'm interested now. So actually, I wonder what are the different ways perhaps I could engage with a university or an individual academic. Perhaps, Chris, you could maybe tell us a little bit about sort of traditionally, what are the traditional ways that business and academia can collaborate?
Well, I suppose it replays some of those ideas that Giovanni was talking about, really, that in some ways value, it's all about value, isn't it? I mean, really, you're going to get knocked on the door. So the old days, we were what we called upstream, and then there was downstream. And it's very patronizing, actually, because I think we're trying to flatten that. But let's think about the old days, that upstream, we might be, University of Edinburgh might be approached by a fire, maybe a building manufacturer who knew that there was fundamental science. So we talk about fundamental science as being experts who really are experimenting with new materials technology to deal with intumescent paints or things that wouldn't catch fire. The world changes its regulations so that fire, that the building company doesn't know where else to go other than talk to upstream, up the ivory tower, where the fundamental research scientists are experimenting with new forms of chemical development that allows them to go back to the company to say, yeah, let's talk about a partnership, a relationship where the value creation is quite specifically about taking the fundamental research into a new product or service. Now, the university has no interest whatsoever in scaling a product, in actually developing a product. We might develop some of the core principles, but actually it's about the company's ability to scale and then deliver. And that would be upstream to downstream. And I think in some ways that demonstrates, if you think about the value proposition, then that requires the company to have a need to pick up the telephone or email across the departments and literally drive the value proposition. Now, I think, yeah, so maybe I should stop there. That I think that's where we talk about the old, that people knew what they wanted. And that value proposition was then very transactional, to be honest. Perhaps later we'll get on to how that value creation is less determined. It's more co-created. But that's how I understood it in the old days.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So, Fiona, I'm interested, Chris outlined sort of traditionally how businesses and universities might operate, and as you said, very transactional, and it was about very specific pieces of knowledge that sometimes the business wanted access to. I think you've got very different experience of kind of creative and innovative ways that businesses and universities can operate.
Well, speaking from the point of view of the MAP Consortium as a business working with universities, we've collaborated in such different ways. Sometimes through the part of the university that is perhaps the business part of the university, the business school. We should acknowledge that dimension that sits inside the university itself, which Giovanni can speak much more about, I'm sure. That might have been a kind of expected way that we might end up kind of hooked in there. But we've also worked with universities that are looking to, in a way, as organisations everywhere might be, looking to develop their culture, looking at how they the identity they have as an organisation, how the values of their organisation are represented and lived in the way that they work. Lots of universities talk and work with us around that. And also, obviously, often with the sphere of the university that is concerned with arts and culture. So that's how we as a business kind of have partnered with universities. And I do think that there is still, this sort of, Chris has talked about that old kind of sort of separate spheres going on. And I think we still do have challenges with that from all these different sectors that we're talking about that are often to do with rhythm. The rhythm of how you work can be very different. the kind of planning frames that people have within business versus the planning frames of academia. The capacity to be responsive and agile is the current key language. So yeah, building relationships in that is always really important.
Okay, thanks. Giovanni, so Fiona's kind of outlined from business experience kind of a different way or different models of working with academia from that traditional model. What's your experience?
Well, again, looking at the relationship, we could explore the relationship from both sides. From the point of view of academia, looking for a relationship with the business and vice versa. Taking the stand of the business-oriented perspective, so from the business point of view, I would say that we can cluster the initiative basically into the two main dimensions. One is what is the transactional relationship, where business has a specific need, is dealing with a specific project, and then engage a relationship with the university. Or on the other hand, the partnership one that Chris was mentioning, which is more about value creation and value transaction, where you create value, you capture value, and you build together a value. What I believe is important from the business point of view is the strategic thinking that the company is taking when approaching the university. So why, what for? Why get in the relationship with the university? If you just look for a transactional relationship, sometimes I don't think the university is the right place where to go, because you can find many other places, other institutions that they can provide better service quicker. But what business needs and will need more is a new way of knowing and thinking. And this is where business, and the only place where actually there is this bubbling of energy or looking for a new way of thinking is the university, is where you find the critical way of thinking, where you will look and we explore as scholars, not only from research point of view, but also from pedagogical point of view, new approaches. And I believe what Fiona was saying, what the MAP has been doing is very interesting, because the university, they themselves have understood that they need to change themselves, how they teach, how they engage with the students, how they, so the university is exploring new ways. So it's not only about training someone in codified way, but in a world where you will need to deal with complexity, open to risk, open thinking. So you will need to have new forms of skills. And so it's not about anymore, because nowadays we know we go a webinar, we can get all the knowledge we want, is out of shelf there. It's more about building a behavior. And university at the same time are slowly, because we are elephantiac system, we are starting to understand that this has to change. And this process is happening in the way how we teach with the students, the kind of knowledge we transfer to the students, because we are understanding that our role is more as a facilitator, and also that we need to bring in a new method, design thinking, like Chris is an expert, Fiona, arts-based initiatives. So also the university is changing. And so the university is the best place for business to develop a new way of thinking and knowing in order to deal with the complexity of the business environment.
Thank you very much.
What came up for me as you were speaking there, Giovanni, and also thinking back to Chris, was, you know, that actually the kind of, the word that's in my mind is research. You know, research which we might have traditionally thought is held upstream in the, you know, actually we've all got to be very skilled researchers at the moment, researchers of knowledge fields outside the discipline that we use. You know, all the walls are kind of becoming porous. We can't just kind of have what we have in our viewpoint. We need to research and understand other perspectives, and artists, business people, creatives, university researchers who may be used to research one way are having to research a different way. So I think research is a really interesting domain to think about as the shared space that we can come together in. And it's also where there's just the most phenomenally exciting stuff happening. I mean, it's just, you know, whether it's, and that's, you know, across fields, across disciplines, and useful, relevant work.
So, Chris, you started off this section with sort of describing a traditional model of how a business might interact with university. I suspect that's probably not commonly how you interact with businesses. And I just want to pick up on, you know, what Giovanni was saying as well about businesses perhaps needing new ways of knowing and thinking. I suspect that that's probably a lot more of your normal activity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think we've gone on a long journey around from knowledge transfer to knowledge exchange now to co-creation. And just to hang on that word, my interpretation of co-creation is the co-creation of value. Now, that doesn't have to be economic. It might be for some of the stakeholders in the network, in the project, but actually value might be social, it might be environmental, it might be resilience. So what I find is that by flattening either the upstream to the downstream or flattening the hierarchy that we set out, we're embedded in ecosystems where value creation is, as Giovanni talks about, is uncertain, is complex, but we know that by working alongside each other, understanding human, social, environmental and economic challenges, that we're more likely to unlock value creation, because we're able to stay in spaces, as Fiona is suggesting, as researchers, professional researchers, academic researchers, learners. So that value creation just unlocks the most extraordinary. Well, one, it allows us to talk about the uncertainties, the things that we're worried about. At a short scale, that we're worried about how we keep jobs, if you're a small business, how we stay alive, but at a big scale, how we do it sustainably. So I think by sharing and understanding, the co-creation of value manifests so many different ways of thinking about, okay, what should we do next? I must admit, after co-creation, when you share the problems, you then begin to talk about co-design. So I think co-design for me occurs afterwards. When you meet in a co-creative context, you're able then to think about what we can both do together, and then you figure out, oh, that's the value piece. That's what we can do together. And in a constellation, there's always another thing that we can do together with another company. But then you move to a co-design space. And I think mutually, people have takeaways. And that mutually it might be different. So from my perspective, working with startups, it's absolutely fascinating how they think about agile, how value creation is changed towards software, or it's to do with products. And my takeaway and learning is radically transformed to go back how I teach, how I then start the next project. For the company, it might be about how aspects of what we do fundamentally as researchers changes their product development. So yeah, it's that flattening and that co-creative moment, which I enter relationships, and it's always the, forgive me, Rumsfeld, it's the known unknowns, or sometimes it's the unknown unknowns, because I'm thrilled where we end up is different from where we started.
That's fascinating, Chris. And we've kind of strayed into an area of actually kind of what might be in it for the university. We've started off with this conversation of why a business might want to be involved in academia and what might be the benefits for them, and a little bit of how we might do that. Fiona, I'm kind of interested from your point of view, why do you think universities and perhaps academics in particular should want to engage with businesses?
I think I'm going to answer as an artist, and I'm sure there are many parallels because it's kind of about the reaching towards something different. But I think it sounds very simple and it sounds very obvious, but I think the need for the outside, the independent, the disruptive perspective is quite big at the moment. And as artists, we've always been in that place. We're always in that space of looking and trying to see what's really happening and making something new. So there's always that kind of lens, if you like, up to things in a very kind of fresh and live way. And I think that's most often why we're called in, I would say. That's why we're called on as a business of artists. But I'm answering from that point of view is the best one I can say.
Okay, no, that's great. And I like this, what you described as sort of the need for disruptive perspective. I think that's interesting. But Giovanni, from your side, from academia, why do you think it is important, or is it important for academics to work with business?
Well, there is a slightly difference. Why is it important for university working with the business, and why it should be for academics working with university and for business? It's slightly different because university is an institution. Then you need to distinguish if it is public or private. But in any case, there could be an utilitarian reason, which is about justifying the existence of the university, particularly when the university is supported by taxpayers. And then university has been looking for justifying or making the case of the existence, not only as a place where we produce graduates, but as an institution working in an ecosystem, working in a realm, so contributing in a different way. But I believe that for academics, using a concept that is typical of artists, academics look for new material of thinking. So, and also we look for a potential impact. The impact can be found in the academia world, where you publish and you are recognized as an esteemed scholar publishing top journal. But your contribution, your impact can be also recognized in making a difference in the real world. And then for academics, it becomes important to look for relationship with the business, where they can express their creativity, their research method, to address a real problem and help to find solution. We found, we know also during the pandemic or during crisis, there have been a lot of research that have been able to provide original solutions that were really important for overcoming some critical dimension. So I think there are multiple dimensions of value, goes back to what Chris was identifying. One are more utilitarian, if you like. Other are more philosophical, related to what we do as academics and why we produce knowledge. And personally, I believe that we should engage with the business, and not only when we talk about business, can be private and public, because we can provide that fresh knowing I was speaking about, that can help to address a problem. Because there is one, and now this is my last comment, there is this different way of thinking. As academics, we tend to think in a complex way. So we don't think the reality in a simple way. Business has to find solution. We look for questions. So it's two different way of thinking. And we both need, because we want our question to be applied to relevant problem, and business should be looking for someone who is questioning about what they do. So I think there is where the value most exists, is where this energy comes in place of the connection and relationship.
I'm gonna jump in as well and second that, because we learned from working with the startup space is that actually the creatives are the best defense against the dark arts. And by that, I mean that we're about to enter an age when data-driven technologies are going to drive products and services. We're going to see AI increasingly make sweeping assumptions about how we govern, how we develop certain economies. And good grief, I mean, really, Cambridge Analytica wouldn't have happened if creatives had been in the room. You just, the moral, the spiritual, the social agenda that artists care about is utterly imaginative, and it's also deeply caring. So I think they offer the radical moral dimension which will steer us toward the products and services that we actually want. There was that great moment, I think, when we all saw maybe 6 years ago, Netflix was starting to use algorithms to start to drive and design the TV shows of the future. They ditched it because they lent into directors and scriptwriters who were human Simply because the products were far better at reading the stories, the things that around which the campfires around which we do want to ask questions of what it is to be human. So yeah, fear not, creatives. You're not going anywhere, because we need to lean into you to help us guide us through some quite challenging data-driven economies, which make huge promises, but really don't necessarily take us to where we want to go as a society.
That's really interesting, Chris, your Netflix anecdote there, because it almost kind of goes back to the Donald Rumsfeld quotation about what's missing in the algorithm is it can't know the unknowns, but perhaps the human touch is able to make that leap. And I think a lot of what we've been saying here is the ability for bringing in outsiders that both benefits university academics for other ways of thinking that are much more direct, as suggested by Giovanni, about businesses want solutions, but also for the business that different way of thinking, that other thing. And possibly because sometimes academics do have this dual role. Whilst an academic might be assisting the business, they've also got to have academic outputs as well. So there are other motivations that maybe allows them to approach things from a different angle. Fiona, I'm kind of interested in actually what it might take for a business to have a meaningful relationship with the university. And what I mean by that is it's quite easy perhaps for a business and university to have some kind of transactional relationship, but actually how do we set something up so that there is more value than just I need this help, there's the help that you need? How do we get more out of it?
I think that's a really good question. I think across all collaborations, whether it's from the business to the academia or the other way on, or whatever sectors you're bringing together, it's about process. So we can all say these ideas of working together and these ideas of value creation and these ideas of need and shared need, and it all sounds wonderful, right? But actually we've got to be able to work together, and people are coming. So although there's this sort of time of change and it's very ripe for connection, people are still coming up through cultures that have very particular ways of seeing things and working, and as I was saying earlier, rhythms and ways of running process. So actually often the MAP is invited to kind of, in a sense, support process and to help people define process that they're going to need in order to co-create. We do a lot of work around co-creation and bringing partnerships together, where you might have a company that's making sailboats sitting in a room with some academics who know everything there is to know about whatever's happening with the change of tides and seas and weather, and those kinds of different perspectives are kind of coming together and trying to give people a sense of actually the basic skills that we need to bring to that. And I think as artists and collaborating artists, we have got something very particular to bring to accelerating process, actually, because you can find, 3 years later, we've made this great thing happen because by then we'd learned to trust each other and we'd learnt what it meant to give robust feedback without upsetting anybody's ego or whatever the issues might be. But actually, with a facilitative process in the mix, people can get there much quicker. So we quite often facilitate partnerships to come together and make work together. And yeah, that reminds me of some previous kind of initiatives that went on in the UK and Scotland, I think, creative partnerships in schools, which was about bringing people together in different, across different cultures, and lots of fantastic work was done there. And I think too many times those initiatives come and we don't hold on to the legacy as well as we should. But yeah, I think I suppose what I'm saying is process and facilitated process.
Great, thanks. Giovanni, can you give us any examples of where you think something gets in the way, either from the business side or from the academic side? What gets in the way of there being meaningful relationships between business and universities, or business and individual academics?
Well, for sure, one thing that can go on the way is not sharing fundamental values, because you start from different perspective. In order to be meaningful and not transactional, you need to share the values inspiring the relationship. So. And I think that is really relevant, because because very often business and academics can be moved by a different, they have a different mission and then different values. So they need to share. They need to find a point of where they share the values that inspire the relationship. And I think that is very important in order to make sure, as Fiona was saying, that the process is working well, because then the behavioral dimension becomes very relevant. Unless the relationship is transactional, then you ask for a report, you get a report, or you ask for a teaching and a training course, you get a training course. But if you want to collaborate to develop a different thinking, a new way, new solution, then you need to build a conversation. And the conversation requires that both parts are able to talk and to listen and then to share some fundamental ideas. So I would say that is the most important obstacle, because they have also different mindset. The academia and business have different mindsets. So the only way, and you don't want to change that mindset, because the reason why they want to come together is because they have different mindset, and you explore and you want to get some serendipity out of that. But in order to make this app working well, then you need to start from the fundamental assumption. And what Fiona was saying, I think is important, which is also what I've been exploring, is important for the reason why to work with between business and arts, is to recognize the fundamental reason of business, which is at the end of the day is to enhance wealth creation for human beings. So human beings are at the center of the attention, and the improvement of the quality of life of human beings. So that is the kind of tacit, more deep reason. And when business and academia and artists, they meet on that common ground, then you have something interesting, evolving for whatever. If instead the reason is a transactional, business-oriented result, maybe will get some result, but will not be exceptional and will not generate the kind of impact that instead we are looking for here.
Beautiful.
So that's really interesting, Giovanni. And I kind of wonder, Chris, perhaps you could address this one. It sort of makes me wonder about kind of where the gaps might be. And that idea, what Giovanni said, of kind of common values, which actually means that the partner sitting down beforehand and actually almost not coming in with a set agenda of this is what we need, but actually let's have a conversation and see where we can go. Do you find that you're dealing with a lot of businesses who are willing to do that, or are you tending to deal with people who at least initially think they know exactly what they need and here's the list, can you give us that?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating actually, because you will get approached with some assumptions about the value creation, and that might be economic, but can a relationship boost our organization economically? And that might be based on threats that we're about to lose. We've done really well through a startup phase, or we've developed a series of products and we want to keep them going. We want to keep the staff. You know, they might have social welfare interests about the scale, but they want to keep it alive, and therefore it becomes a value proposition around economics, and that's the problem. So that can be the barrier, actually, that people assume that the benefits should be measured through money. And actually what you want to move them toward is perhaps a triple bottom line. I know Scotland leads on a triple bottom line through Creative Scotland, the idea that if we're going to give money out, it should support economically, yes, but socially and then culturally. I know other ones might be economic, social and environmental. So I do think value creation, it can be a barrier when people want to use money and increase in profits as the starting point. But as Janet Varney says, that in the end, you end up finding the most exciting and exhilarating value creation, because it turns out that if you get your social and environmental credentials sorted out within a partnership, it adds economic value. So in the end, you end up with this purpose-led coming together, which leads to, I mean, if you think about all the brands, folks, every brand you have, every app on your phone or every brand, if you could add an environmental and cultural value add to all of those, I daren't say some companies, I guarantee it would sell more. You know, I mean, that's the turn. That's why we're getting so many people come to us at the university now, because they're either being forced through regulation to lead on environmental or social values, and that's way transcends the value. If you think all the trillions of pounds worth of money that's about to be invested in data-driven technologies, you guarantee the companies that will last have got hipsters at the heart of them, as well as the hustlers and the hackers. And that's simply because of the work that Fiona and colleagues bring in spades to a proposition. If you just leave it to the hackers and the hustlers, you'll end up with more bankrupt, moral, environmental projects. So, yeah, I think it's what opens up, bringing people who care deeply. If I said there was a barrier, though, Malcolm, it would be that can we get the creatives to push open the doors? That's my problem, that I can't find the same confidences, apologies Fiona, in your community that I find with the arrogances, with the hustlers and the hackers. They both seem to own the proposition in startup space. And if only I could get the creative to say, stop, get out of the way, we own this court, work with us. And I can't quite get them to have quite as much confidence.
So Fiona, that maybe I'll let you come back to Chris on that one, but perhaps I'm wondering aloud if actually this is perhaps something to do with the nature of the creative industries, you know, in terms of the proportion of sole practitioners, sole traders, and is it a problem of people not being used to working in teams and collaboratively?
So that may be true for some, but then the other end of the spectrum is equally true, in the sense that those artists that are working in teams are, you know, kind of hyper teamed, and you know, kind of the best people in the world to find to work on collaboration, because they do it across discipline in the arts, and they do it at speed and with high levels of risk. I'm really interested about this thing of confidence that Chris has raised, and you know, I think we have to kind of say and know that, you know, the arts and culture, and right now this minute in this country, you know, is beaten on the head all the time, and is, you know, always pushed out, brought to the table last, not valued. You know, we're about to kind of lose key aspects of education for our young people in terms of arts provision. So, you know, maybe that makes us like a little bit unsure. And I think, you know, we're very used to having the begging bowl in our hand. So equally though, when you find those of us that are interested in this kind of collaborative endeavour, you know, there just will be a fearlessness. So that's what we need to go for, I think. And in our time as the MAP, we've done lots of work with artists who perhaps have been working, as you're saying, Malcolm, in a pretty solo kind of space, and we've led residentials and training and development sessions with them, to give artists the space to think about how they want to go about this work, how they want to step into these kinds of pools of water and partnerships which involve them, you know, in stuff that's going to, you know, take them away from the pure art endeavor that needs to be protected as well, actually. So that I think is an interesting time for artists in terms of that, of how we, you know, how we embrace, step into, have our voice, lead on this stuff, and also how we take care of, yeah, the kind, I don't want to say pure art, that's the wrong sort of language, but how we nourish the fire that is where the art comes from, is really important.
So I think it's really interesting what you're talking about. At one end, we have a lot of individuals who are very into interdisciplinary practice and embrace it wholeheartedly. And reminded me, I have a friend in business, a very creative business, who actually eschews the term interdisciplinary, and he talks about anti-disciplinary, because actually he thinks that that's still putting everyone in a pigeonhole, and we should all be sharing all these knowledges across all these boundaries. So I'm conscious that the people who hopefully are still watching our session have an interest in this area already. Now we just kind of talked about, perhaps, you know, Chris was suggesting that there's maybe, how do we get to people that are not being that keen to engage in working with between business and academia. So I guess just for the whole panel, kind of closing question really is, how do you think we can make things better? How can we make a better experience for both creative businesses working with universities and perhaps for the individual academics? What can we do to make a difference? Who would like to start?
Well, this is it is an open and critical question. I think personally, I believe that and this is also what I'm developing in my research, and this is also a practice that is spreading across business, the creation of innovation labs, or what I also like to call learning space. So these are not traditional research and development centers that tends to be inward-looking, scientific based, but this becomes really kind of spaces that I call learning spaces. So they become an atmosphere. They can become a lab in a traditional way, a fab lab, a technology lab, or they can become just a space of facilitation where artists comes in and help you to facilitate brainstorming a creative session. So we need to create this kind of interface dimension of space where business and academia can work, and they can cross-fertilize themselves. So I think that is a critical dimension. I see a problem, a risk in general in the relation between academia and the business that we need to be aware. Also, academia is getting more and more busy. So this is the idea of academics just sitting at the table, doing their research, their reading. I mean, I think, honestly, over the year, as I'm losing my hair and getting white, I discovered that we work a lot, really a lot. No time, no stop. Probably like artists, no stop. So why I'm saying this? Because to be meaningful, where really we need to find a way where we facilitate this interaction and we are able to create, well, this is something which is an open question actually, because there is not out of the book, there is not a cooking book recipe to say this is the option. But I think we need to experiment ways of interacting, of learning, where in a very effective way, we are able to create a positive spillover effect, both for business and academia. And I believe that this space of what I call learning space, InnoLabs, where there is this cross investment, where academia can experiment their research question and business can bring onto the table their problems, could be a good way of facilitating and creating meaningful relationship. And the last point, because this was something that also we discussed, but we touched very quickly, we need also to recognize that the nature of skills that needs to be developed in the new world will be different. And we have been experiencing this with COVID, now with this geopolitical tension, and we are moving, and as the artificial intelligence will replace most of our computational activity, and Rob will be much better than us very soon, even doing good pancakes. So we need to understand what we can be different. And I think the learning the new skills will be more about this adaptation, this resilience, this imagination, this also improvisation, which is typical of artists, is something I've learned from them, to learn to improvise, looking all, and be all keeping your positivity, because the other thing is that we are getting more and more stress. And so there is also, we need to create this space, and we need to understand what are the new competence for prosperity in the future. And this is something that we will need to reflect. So that's my idea.
So Chris, what about you? What do you think can make things better?
Sure. Well, I do like the idea of Giovanni's shared spaces. I suppose I can't help not riff off that really, but I think it's we need creatives to lean in. I think if you consider yourself a creative in the audience watching this, lean in. Start attending all those places where you wouldn't normally think you're invited. Go to the blockchain meetups. Go to the fintech meetups. Go to the philosophy meetups. Maybe you do already. Go wherever you feel uncomfortable, because I guarantee people will desperately need you, because you think completely differently. I've only learned recently, after, 30 years in academia, that I'm a visual thinker, and I'm surrounded by informaticians who just don't think visually. So suddenly they said, we need you, Chris, because you think visually, and you're suddenly adding storytelling to our systems, which we don't have skills for. So artists, you've got to push the door open and get yourselves into every possible meetup. And then the other way around, I think academia has to let everyone in, let as many creatives in. If you're chairing a group where there isn't diversity that includes creatives, let them in, find one, go actively in search of a creative who gets them in the room. Because I think, handing over to Fiona, it's about the porosity, and you can judge every event inside the academy or outside in a business and question, is it porous? If you haven't got people in the room from diverse perspectives, then you didn't convene a porous event. So push in or let in.
Fiona, do you want to pick up on that?
I agree everything that Giovanni and Chris have said, and I particularly feel for this thing of space, of physical space, as we do this in this recorded, in this moment of onlineness. And I know that Expo North is kind of returning to live soon, in person soon. Thank goodness, because it is a different thing. It is a really different thing. And I think a couple of things. One is that, earlier Chris was talking about the beautifully eloquent about the power of the human in the digital, sphere, and that there's, there's this wonderful need for it at the moment. And I would also say, and it is massively under threat. So we really have got to lift up Giovanni's beautiful suggestion that where the deep work might be happening is when we're thinking about the human wealth in the biggest and deepest way. So I think we've got to kind of raise the ambition a bit in the language of what we're doing, and ask the big questions and make the big invitations. And that's also, to Chris's point, I think, I love that push in and let in is great. And just because I'm a fan of an invitation, can we just keep making good invitations and better invitations? Because actually people will come, when the invitation is right. So I think about what invitations you're making to whom, and why you're not making certain invitations that you could be making.
I think that's a wonderful sentiment to wrap up on there. Thank you very much for the panel. I think I've personally really enjoyed this conversation. I think we could probably go on for hours on this, and perhaps there's another few panels in this topic that should continue, because I think it is definitely an important thing to discuss. I think it's wonderful, Fiona, earlier you were talking about the need for disruptive ideas as being important for business, particularly creative business. And I think that's a wonderful way forward as well, to kind of grasp that opportunity. And Chris, when you talked about that, sometimes people read value as money and profit, but actually there's so many other ways that value can be added through these kind of collaborations. I think that's a really important thing to remember. And part of the way that you get there is, as Giovanni suggested, that you share those common values to inspire the relationship right at the beginning. That even if people are coming together with a specific task in mind, perhaps the role of everyone in the room is to then look beyond that immediate need and say, to ask, why do you think you need this? Well, actually, perhaps we can address the root issues and we can create larger value and different kinds of value that perhaps speak of something different. And again, I think all of us in the room, we're talking about sort of like creative thinking is so much more than just artwork, which is, it's obvious to all of us here, but we also need to be conscious that lots of people who are not involved in the creative industry see, creative things as colouring in. And genuinely, parts of universities, I've been conscious, have described design departments as the colouring in department. But we know the value that we can add, particularly to business. And I think it is incumbent on us to make those connections and start inviting everyone. And I would maybe ask everyone who's watching this, think about anything you are doing. Can you invite someone else in? There's lots of other people in these conferences. Perhaps through Expo North, you can make those kind of connections. You can invite people to join these conversations and start something amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.